Hello, universe. Welcome to my world. Recently, we did an Angelina Jordan video where we spoke about her inspiration being Billie Holiday, and then we branched off into who inspired Billie Holiday. Do you remember when Angelina was telling us about this?
Så fant jeg fra YouTube, og så kom det masse artister. Louis Armstrong, Billie Holiday.
And one of the things we learned from Billie Holiday is that Louis Armstrong was one of her inspirations, as well as for Angelina Jordan. But Billie Holiday was born in 1915, and Louis Armstrong was born in 1900 in New Orleans. And in terms of the history of jazz, New Orleans in 1900 was the place to be. But as Billie Holiday herself says,
and no one person originated it.
Which is true, but Louis Armstrong was there or thereabouts. Louis Armstrong had very humble origins growing up in 1900. And one of his early influences was Joe King Oliver, who was a jazz trumpeter in New Orleans, who founded a band called Creole Jazz Band, which Louis Armstrong joined. And this is what the band sounded like in 1923, which is 100 years ago. Let's take a deep dive into the music of Louis Armstrong, because he's a massive influence on Angelina Jordan. Unusually, he's equally famous for being a trumpet player and a singer, but today we'll only be looking at him as a singer. And if nothing else, he's most famous for his rich, gravelly voice. There's another singer born maybe 50 years after Louis Armstrong, also famous for his gravelly voice. Do you remember Rod Stewart?
Wake up, Maggie, I think I got something to say to you.
But that's nothing compared to the gravel in Louis' voice. Before we hear what gravel sounds like with Louis Armstrong's Mac the Knife, let's hear 4 years later the smooth voice of Bobby Darin, which was the #1 hit.
Ooh, the shark bait has such teeth, dear, and it shows them pearly white.
Oh, the shark has pretty teeth, dear, and he shows them pearly white. Just a jackknife as McHeath, dear, and he keeps it out of sight.
Angelina Jordan doesn't have a gravelly voice, but she has a rich voice when she needs it. Let me give you a couple of examples. When she covers Lana Del Rey, you can hear the difference in her voice. She chooses to make it much richer. Angelina doesn't have gravel in her voice, but she does have a little bit of tremolo. It's not gravelly, but there's a bit of grit, and it's really quite solid. Listen to the difference.
Don't fail me now. Take me to the finish line. Oh, my heart, it breaks every step that I take. Feet don't fail me now. Take me to the finish line. Oh, my heart is raised every step that I take. But I'm hoping that the gates, they'll tell me that you're mine. Walking through the city streets, is it by mistake of design?
Same again when John Legend sings All of Me. He's written and performed a wonderful song, but when Angelina sings it, she brings a different level of richness to her voice.
What would I do without your smart mouth? Drawing me in and you kicking me out. You got my head spinning, no kidding.
What would I do without your smart mouth? Draw me in and kicking me out. Got my head spinning, no kidding. I can't pin you down. What's going on there, beautiful mind?
12 months ago, I didn't know what scat singing was, so I've had a very steep education. For those of you who don't know, scat singing is when you don't use proper words, but you use nonsense syllables. You use improper words just to go along with the music. Until recently, I thought scat singing really originated with Ella Fitzgerald. But here, we have a fellow musician talking about Louis Armstrong and how Louis Armstrong really was the first one to use it. Then we'll hear a couple of examples from Louis Armstrong. The first one, he's improvising with a horn player. And keep in mind Billie Holiday's famous words when she described her own approach to singing.
I always wanted to sing like an instrument.
And next, he's singing Dinah, where he alternates the proper lyrics with the scat singing.
And not only that, he was what we call the scat singer. Louis was the first one to do that. Now, he was on a record date once, and he was holding up a sheet of music to read the words to the song, dropped the sheet of music, and he didn't want to ruin the record, so he went on to sing. Re-bop, de-bop, de-bop, de-boom, you know, scat singer.
Fellas can get, the fella she get met. Yeah, Papa don't be bad, Papa Susan, yes. Patty don't Susan, oh yes. Dinah, is anyone finer in the state of Carolina? If there is, let me know. Show to me, Dinah, the Dixon blazing, we love the city gazing to the eyes of Dinah me. Baby, every night, one eye, shake with fight on, cause my dynamite, change your mind, Baba did you don't you want to do Dinah, baby? I'll have a new Dinah, oh, baby. Oh, Dinah, Dinah. Oh, Dinah, oh, baby, Dinah, Dinah, oh, baby, every night, well, oh, that's me, that's my dynamite, but this is so that you want to do Dinah, baby, I'd have an old yeah.
Angelina Jordan herself doesn't do scat singing, but she sometimes will use nonsense words. She'll use just syllables with her music. Listen to what she does with her introduction to Billie Jean. Louis Armstrong was born more than 100 years before Angelina Jordan. I didn't have to do any research at all to see if Louis Armstrong used TikTok, but he was able to give many improvised performances, not in the studio, in the most informal of settings. Here he is singing while being interviewed on an airplane. And then we will hear an improvised non-studio performance from Angelina Jordan. Louis Armstrong's traveling on an airplane. Angelina Jordan is traveling on foot in a car park.
You looking swell, darling. I can tell, darling. You keep glowing, you're still growing, you're still going strong. I feel the room swaying and the band swaying. One of our old favorite tunes from Real Like Wind.
It's a new day, it's a new dawn, it's a new life for me and feeling good, and I feel
All of Me is one of Billie Holiday's most iconic songs. She recorded it in 1941. 75 years later, Angelina Jordan recorded it, and it's remarkable how similar the two versions are. But what is overlooked is that in 1932, 9 years earlier, Louis Armstrong also recorded the song. Listen how different his version is from the other two.
All of me, why not take all of me? Can't you see I'm no good without you?
All of me, why not take all of me? Can't you see I'm no good without you?
All of me. Why not take all of me, baby? Oh, can't you see? I'm no good without you. Oh, baby, take me. I want to lose them. Oh, baby, take my arms. I'll never use them. Oh, baby, your goodbye left me with eyes that cry. Oh, yeah.
And Angelina and Louis both did the same song. Angelina covered his version of What a Wonderful World.
I see trees of green. Red roses too. I see them blue for me and you. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and you, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world.
It is fitting and proper that we end our story today on a non-musical note. Louis Armstrong was world famous. He had a massive talent and he was much loved. And he had a wonderful personality, which was part of the package. He was kind and charitable, and this was really instrumental in his life and his career. Really, we can say the same thing about Angelina Jordan. Here, his own personal doctor speaks about the wonderful qualities that Louis Armstrong had.
He was like a brother. He wouldn't go anywhere without me. We were so close that people couldn't realize why I stayed with him. It wasn't the money. It was the love for the man, his kindness, his goodness, his charitableness, and of course, his artistry. It was really something to have known him.
And both Louis and Angelina had this wonderful foundation, giving them this wonderful outlook on the world. They're both full of admiration and delight in the role that their mother played in their life. Here, Louis is speaking about his own mom and how he used her as a guiding light throughout his own life.
His mother, May Ann, was devoted to Louis and to his younger sister, Beatrice. Occasionally, May Ann took her children out of New Orleans to the sugarcane fields of Boutie, 70 miles west of the city, where her family had once worked on the plantations and where they enjoyed a sense of community that would stand Louis in good stead for the rest of his life. As Armstrong later recalled,
One thing about May Ann, everybody from the church folks to the lowest gave her the greatest respect. She never envied no one or anything they might have. I guess I inherited that part of life from May Ann.
The origins of jazz is really obscured in history. Billie Holiday is right. No one person originated it. But Louis Armstrong was really instrumental in its formation. And in their own way, Billie Holiday and now Angelina Jordan have picked up the baton and they're running with it. We will continue to look at the life and career of Angelina Jordan in the future. Okay, gang, I'm out of here. I'll catch you later. Bye.